Welcome to this edition of the Talk of Simsbury. My name is Dominique Avery. The talk this month is the legislative session. Usually by this time we're almost ready to preview the new session coming up in February. But we're here today in early December to talk about last year's session, which finally ended with a budget agreement on the very last day of October. You know the song that never ends? Well, this seemed to be the session that never seemed to end. I'm joined today by Simsbury Democratic State Representative John Hampton. He's an assistant majority leader, ranking member of the, what committee is that, John?
Internship.
The Internship Committee. Yes, I can't read. And he was also he also serves on the Aging and Commerce Committees, and he was part of a group of renegade Democratic House members who voted with the Republicans to approve the budget, which the governor then vetoed. So we'll hear some more about that from him. Also here today is our State Senator Kevin Witkos, who's serving his fifth term in the Senate and is the Deputy Senate Republican President pro tempore, or pro tempore, however you say it. I'm not sure. How do you say it? He also serves as the Vice Chair of the Executive and Legislative Nominations Committee, the Public Safety and Security Committee, and the Legislative Management Committee. And finally, we're very fortunate that one of the most experienced state capitol reporters happens to live in Simsbury. He is Chris Keating, and he's been the Hartford Courant Capitol Bureau Chief for 18 of the past 20 years. He's covered the state budget and the legislature during the administrations of Governors Lowell Weicker, John Rowland, Jody Rell, and Daniel Malloy. So thank you, all three of you, for coming and doing this show and for helping the residents of Simsbury be better informed. And because today we're doing this show for an hour, I think we can get into a lot of details, so any political junkies out there will be happy to listen.
Thank you so much for having us.
Sure.
Chris, I covered the legislature for 13 years when I was at CTN, including the Rowland and Rell years, and I never saw anything like this session. You've been there a lot longer than I was. How does this compare to anything that you've seen before?
Well, it was the longest in state history. I mean, people always talk about the state income tax, which was in 1991 with Lowell Weicker, and how bad that was and how it went all summer and how difficult it was. And it was a very, very hot summer for anybody who was paying attention back then. But the thing to remember on that bill was signed August 22nd of 1991, which seemed very, very late. And Weicker had closed down the parks on the 4th of July, and it was a big problem. Anyway, fast forward this year, Malloy didn't sign the budget till Halloween. So there's a big gap between August 22nd and Halloween. So this year really was the worst ever. There were some gaps. There was some periods in August when everyone was on vacation, etc., and the legislators can fill that in. But it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. There was a long period of time where there were really no votes, and then we got to a point where there was votes and it was vetoed, and then we went into another period where Malloy was kind of shoved out of the room, and the legislators decided to do it themselves, which is really what happened. And they knew if they had to get it by a veto-proof margin, they could do it, and that's basically what happened.
Was a fascinating year, and I'm going to turn to our two legislators. Each one of you, I'm sure, has opinions on what caused this longest session ever. The tie in the Senate, the smaller Democratic majority, perhaps, the terrible budget situation. Kevin, John, weigh in on what you think happened this year.
Sure, I think it's because of the majorities in the chambers. It was historic. In the Senate, we had an 18-18 tie. So every single vote counted. This was the first time that the Lieutenant Governor broke as many votes as has happened in over 150 years, because some votes came down along party lines, and generally that's where the budget occurs. So with the power sharing agreement, I think that we went in there saying, these are our priorities from the Republican perspective. We have to control costs. We need to have a spending cap, a bonding cap, the things to right the financial direction of the state of Connecticut, because we're going down a path that there's no returning from. It's not sustainable, and that was our goal going forward. It's up to the majority party to develop a budget. We simultaneously developed our budget. That's what happened towards the end, 3 Democrats in the Senate opted not to go for the vote on the Democrat budget because it was never called, because we called our budget as an amendment, and they ended up voting for the Republican budget, which then became a bipartisan budget and was sent down to the House. That was the one that the governor vetoed.
Yeah, so let me jump over to John, because you were part of that
renegade.
group.
You called me a renegade.
I did call you a renegade.
Gosh, I've never been called a renegade, but
It's sort of how it seemed to me, that it was sort of a little group of Democratic state representatives from more conservative towns who got together and decided to vote for the Republican budget. Is that how it went down?
I think all of us, and I want to thank Senator Witkos for his leadership, and it was great to work with him in a bipartisan manner this year on the budget. It was epic. But by the time that vote came around, which was, gosh, the dates are swimming in my head, that vote was September?
I think so.
We were so frustrated by the uncertainty that we were giving to our residents. I had a call the night before from a longtime town resident who has an adult child with a disability. He lived here his whole life. He said, John, I can no longer live in Connecticut. He moved in the middle of the night out of Connecticut because he had no predictability for his child. And there's no predictability for our businesses, our young people, our older people. And the analogy I used is that we're flying, you ever been on a plane and you're circling the airport because of some problem and you're just not landing? I think all of us said, we have to land this plane, get a bipartisan budget done, Republican or Democrat, for the good of the state, bring the parties closer together, and quit the partisan bickering that is so prevalent at the national level. That we had to rise above party and work together and have conversations. As Kevin mentioned, the spending cap was in there, the bonding cap, funding our schools, funding our families with disabilities. And our party had yet not produced a full document at that juncture. So, we had a document in front of us that was workable. And at the end of the day, it was vetoed, but I really think that brought us even closer.
So was that the point of sending it to the governor when you knew he was going to veto it?
I didn't know. I didn't know. The chances were that he was, but I thought the worst case scenario is that it would bring us closer to a final agreement and meeting more regularly. But it was just, I think, inexcusable for us to. It was a session of fits and starts. It just seemed to just and it just really, I think, really made our citizenry unsettled, and I think it was just so unfair to them.
Well, certainly things were up in the air, and in Simsbury, the governor had threatened a $6 million cut to our budget, which our school budget, which would have been unbelievable.
Well, it's unfair to the towns like Simsbury and other towns that plan so well. And, we're penalizing towns that are fiscally responsible, like Simsbury and other towns. And
okay, so let me take this another step further. So it ended up going back to both parties, both legislatures. You did end up passing a budget. The governor signed it, and then 2 weeks later, he made another group of huge cuts, which I think took legislators by surprise. Chris, do you want to describe a little bit what happened there?
Yeah, what happened with that was the governor, just for time frame, the governor signed the budget on Halloween, and then he did some line item vetoes regarding the hospital tax, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, fast forward, the legislature gives him some power called lapses in the building. Essentially what it is, in other words, let's take $100 million or $200 million, and it basically gets inserted in the budget, and it said, Governor, you figure it out, in other words. So we're going to put that cut in there, but we're not going to tell you exactly what to do. Anyway, make a long story short, he cut $91 million from the cities and towns. Basically, all the cities and towns were included. Some were more than others. Enfield and West Hartford were both over $2 million each. Those were the two highest, so Enfield and West Hartford. Southington was around 1.7 million, et cetera, et cetera. So the legislators didn't like that, but that is the way that it stands right now. There had been some talk about coming in a special session and fixing that, and the legislators can talk about that. And then there was another problem we can talk about if you want, the Medicare Savings Program.
Right.
That's another issue that some people were not happy with, but that's going to be postponed at least until March. So there was a little bit of a reprieve there if anybody is watching and uses the Medicare Savings Program.
So, yeah, so that was, I found that actually amusing, sort of the session that never ends. There was a closed-door meeting with legislators, and were you there, Kevin, at the meeting?
Most recently,
with the governor?
last week now.
Okay, so to talk about the Medicare savings problem and a number of other things, and the House Speaker, Joe Simowitz, said afterwards, I think the new reality in this building is that there's going to be constant conversations and sharing of ideas on budgetary matters throughout. There is no more off-season. So it's like we're in a permanent state of a permanent legislature now, almost.
Well, our hands are tied somewhat to some degree with the passage of the CBAC agreement. That locked up the hands of the legislature for 10 years. And if we look at any type of a business, the largest cost of anything is the cost of labor. And we're prohibited from really, at the state level, doing anything with labor because we can't really find savings by closure of different entities, by combining different entities, if the labor part of that equation still remains whole. So we're dealing with compiling a budget knowing that the biggest portion of the state expense can't be touched. So how do we move that forward? And as Chris said, there were some lapses built in there. However, that we identified through our priorities when we reinstated basically all of the money that the governor cut from the towns and cities by developing an educational cost sharing formula which we felt fairly funded and addressed all the outstanding lawsuits against the state, both past and current, that would meet any type of a challenge. And so the towns know now there's a ECS formula in place that they can count on every year, knowing the number of students that are enrolled in that district. We said to the governor, these are the legislative priorities. We built into the budget. It's in law. You can't change that. However, we said, here's a list of things, if you have to find rescissions, you should look towards. When the governor had the opportunity, he didn't look towards that list. He said, well, they left the hard task up to me, so I'm going back and I'm going to cut where I think it's appropriate. We don't believe in the legislature that that is an appropriate cut. All these towns have developed their budgets already and have passed them. They're moving forward into those. So I think there may be some adjustments when we come in to do the deficit mitigation plan in January, which means if our revenues or our estimates are off by more than 1% of the budget, the governor has to develop a deficit mitigation plan. He's in the process of doing that. The legislature will look at his plan, and then if we don't like it, we'll develop our own plan, and we're going to address those encumbrances that the governor put in there that we didn't like.
Right, so we are sort of in a permanent state because the legislature official session doesn't start till the first week of February. So we're in a possible special session, deficit mitigation, et cetera.
Well,
go ahead.
Dominic, let me tell you, the reason why we're here is because of failed policies of years and years and years. Budgets built on assumptions that were not realistic. So if there was money, there would be no problem. We'd be in and out, and we move on. So
that goes back to what I said in the very beginning. It's a budget crisis. But just to be clear, the CBAC issues did not start with this governor. Part of the whole problem, a huge amount of money was caused by Rowland and a lawsuit, right?
But that would have ended in 2017. This governor extended that
10 years.
Twice
Right.
now, so we would already have dealt with that during this past budget session.
And that does, to Kevin's point, I was the only Democrat who voted against that because it does tie our hands.
You mean the CBAC agreement?
The CBAC. For example, I don't think any of us can agree that DMV works well, sadly, for our constituents. If we wanted to possibly privatize that, look at, a different way to operate that, we can't do things like that. We can't do, probably can't even consolidate agencies because of that and be more efficient for our state. So, I think we all agree that our state employees work hard and deserve good benefits and pay, but having guarantees of increases for wages and no layoffs for 10 years, our residents don't have that. They're struggling. Our seniors don't have that. So it's a problem. Kevin, you said something about a new ECS formula. Was there a new ECS formula developed this year that I just completely missed? I know I did not pay 100% attention.
Yeah. So in 2012, going back, under the Obama administration, when he had given extra cash, if you will, to the state, Governor Rell had pushed that through to the individual towns, and that became the baseline for how education was funded for the following 5 or 6 years.
Right.
It was a flat line appropriation. What you got that year was what you got the next year, unless you were a legislator that was in some kind of a power or authority figure, then you maybe got a few extra crumbs for your community. So we didn't have a formula, and that's what basically the latest lawsuit, the CJEF versus Rell, and Judge McCauser said, you're giving enough money towards education in your state budget, but how you're divvying that up is not right. And so that was really one of the reasons why it took so long for the budget to move forward, because we did develop a new ECS formula that we think rightly distributes the money
You
appropriately.
meaning
the leaders, if you will,
Okay.
and then voted on a bipartisan basis by the General Assembly.
Yeah, essentially what happened there was, for lack of a better term, it expired. So in other words, we did not have an ECS formula. We just did not. When the new fiscal year started as of July 1st, you basically have to renew it, for lack of a better term, to keep it going in the budget. So as of July 1st, we did not have an ECS formula.
ECS, just for people who are not, is the education
Costs.
Right.
cost
Cost-sharing formula, and it's basically the driver. It's something like $2 billion. It's the biggest driver of money to the cities and towns. ECS, maybe we should just call it the education formula. Basically, it's the Hartford, for example, gets about $200 million in this category per year. $200 million, and a small town like Avon would probably get $1 million or less than $1 million. So there's a huge wide difference in this, but that is the big money driver, this so-called ECS formula.
Just because this is only seen in Simsbury. Simsbury gets considerably more than that because we have a lower economic.
Yeah,
and
Simsbury,
industrial
John
base.
could tell you, I think Simsbury is in the 6 million range.
6 million.
6 million range, but and that's how it goes.
So the whole thing seems very depressing to me. So we have a new problem that you both touched on slightly, and that is that the budget included cuts on this Medicare Savings program, and now they're going to. Can somebody outline for me what that is, why people went into a panic about that, and what the legislature and what DSS is going to do about that?
Quickest explanation, and the legislators can explain it too. Quickest explanation, it's called the Medicare Savings Program, but basically it's just using Medicaid money. What it is that you're not going to lose your Medicare. In other words, if you're a senior and you go to the hospital, you're still on Medicare. What the Medicare Savings Program is it's money that helps you pay your Part B premiums, it helps you pay your deductibles, it helps you pay your co-insurance. So it's very important, but it's not like being completely knocked off Medicare, if that makes sense. So in other words, I'm a senior, I go to the hospital for 30 days, I still have Medicare coverage. But the Medicare Savings Plan is very important, and it's for low-income seniors, and what they did was the proposal at least, was to reduce the threshold so that only even poorer people could qualify. So if you were in that gap between the different levels that they changed, you would potentially no longer qualify, so you wouldn't get any of these subsidies. That might be an oversimplification, but that's essentially how it works.
So I read somebody said the phones were ringing off the hook, and so Kevin, did you get calls too? Were there?
Sure. We got a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. We were characterized as being inhumane. This is how devastating. How could you do this? But let me bring you back to how we got to that point where it was adopted in the budget. The governor had proposed in his budget to reduce the Medicare savings plans down to match the federal level for benefits. And there was not a peep from anyone as we were developing the legislative budget. So we just took his number and put it in our budget because it was a savings of whatever it is, $57 million this year and 60-something next year, I think. I may be off on the numbers. And it wasn't until the budget was adopted and Commissioner Bremby sent out notices to those that are recipients of the Medicare Savings Plan to say, your benefit's getting reduced because the state of Connecticut has moved to adopt the federal level of income rather than what we have now for benefits. So we're on a path of unsustainability in the state of Connecticut. We can't continue to give the benefits. We're going back to fix that. That's the number one priority of all the leaders in the legislature. Whether we go back and have a vote in 2 minutes and pass it so people will be made whole, but we can't continue to keep providing the benefit levels that we do in the state of Connecticut and without changing it. We're going to have another massive tax increase if we're going to do that. We've got to start reducing and appropriately the type and the size of the benefits that we give to folks. And I think we need to have a true asset test on everything. The folks that need it really should deserve to get it. But too often I hear stories of folks, for example, one of my coworkers, his previous spouse was on food stamps. They had gotten married. He said, we don't need the food stamps anymore. She had to fight for 4 months to be taken off the food stamp list. And this is fighting the government. Said, no, keep your money. I don't need it any longer. I don't qualify. And they were resistant to taking her name off of the food stamp list. And those are the types of things where it doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we need better controls in government.
Was that a bureaucratic snafu, do you think?
I just think that it was a caseworker saying, no, you're eligible. You should take it and keep it. And they didn't want it or need it anymore.
It's a devastating cut to our seniors, and I, like Kevin, am hearing from lots of Simsbury residents who are quite concerned. That was one of the reasons I did not support the budget, is that it was punitive to that program and to others and in need. And I think our citizens are so frustrated when programs like that are cut, and then we go and pay millions of dollars for an Excel center, and the bonding continues. Last week or a couple weeks ago, was another huge bonding package, and it just says something about our priorities. And I think we are in agreement that we do need to go back and fix that, and because it's the right thing to do. Plus, it's an investment. If we don't, these folks are going to end up in ERs and on the street or God knows where. So if either of you had to guess, are you going to go back in special session, or are you going to wait till the session begins in February?
My guess is if we go back, it'll be in January. We won't go back in December. It's just too press the time schedule.
But you will go back in January?
I think in January, because the final estimate earnings for the capital gains will be paid by December 31st. Folks are anticipating, from what we're hearing in the news, retailers are having a good Christmas seasons for sales, so hopefully that'll show an increase in the sales tax collections. And then we'll have an idea when the comptroller and the Office of Policy Management, which is the governor's budget folks, come up with their consensus revenue. Do they match? We'll see where we are. Maybe we won't have to do a deficit mitigation plan, but we're definitely coming back to fix the Medicare Savings plan.
All right, let me go back to the regular session and things that happened in the session. John, I noticed this week you earned a 100% voting record for the 2017 session, and you were there and voted 417 times. And then I got Kevin's mailer on. Have you seen it, Kevin?
I got mine.
On
It's
your
nice.
accomplishments.
It's good.
So I wanted to give the two of you a chance to talk about. Were there positive things that happened? What actually happened in the session? We've been sort of talking about the end of the session and problems. Are there things that you'd like to tell your constituents about that happened that were positive?
Well, on the bright side, I continue to champion those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I co-chair the IDD caucus, and we talked about predictability earlier. We were able to fund employment and day services for those families and continue to give them a voice in the state capitol and equal footing for their rights that they deserve. On the economic side, it was really all budget. I'm really, while I didn't love many aspects of the final budget, Kevin and I both agreed on the spending cap, and the bonding cap was so necessary moving forward. So those are some positives that happened, but we were very, very focused on, I think, the budget.
Kevin, you're on a number of committees, so I actually have not read what you talked about yet. I was hoping you would tell me what positives came out of the session legislation.
Sure. Well, going back to John's point too, we retained the funding for the most important programs in the most vulnerable population of our state. I mean, that was a big accomplishment for everybody. to make sure that was done, because the governor went right after that population, because sometimes they lack a voice. So I think on a bipartisan basis, we did that. We, on some of the committees that I serve on, we looked at reducing barriers to employment, whether that is removing some licensure requirements that don't impact public safety or public health issues. We looked at, off the top of my head, I wish I didn't ask that question. I have a lot of different things that in my flyer. No, I mean,
what did you do?
I think we did a lot of good work in the legislature, and a lot of constituent issues were addressed.
So you're on the Public Safety Committee. I remember there being a big discussion about drones and how to control them. Did that come up?
Well, this year I think the Public Safety Committee focused on casino gambling and the allowing the tribal nations to form a private corporation, if you will, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, to start a third casino, if you will, on non-tribal lands. That's in the midst of a lawsuit. I know we'll be dealing with that again this next legislative session, because MGM's coming in trying to build a casino in Bridgeport. They're proposing. There's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about the Connecticut Lottery Corporation wanting to do some online gaming themselves. I know we're going to be looking at some of the quasi-public agencies in our state because of some of the mismanagement that's been going on. I think we need to rein them in a little bit.
Quasi-public for people who... Chris, you want to describe that?
They're kind of off-budget agencies, for lack of a better term, like the lottery, CHFA, and some of these other things. They are so-called quasi-publics. The general public might think that the lottery, for example, is a complete public agency. But what I was going to say on the highlights, the accomplishments, depends how you look at it, but one of the biggest accomplishments is it could have been worse. Basically, most of what I've been writing about for the last 8 or 10 months, in other words, it could have been worse. In other words, Simsbury could have been cut more, Canton could have been cut more, Avon could have been cut more. That might not make people happy, but it is the truth that the struggle to prevent things from being even worse, you have to, in this context, you have to view that as an accomplishment. If you stop something from being worse, this thing that we were talking about, Simsbury could have lost $6 million or whatever the numbers were. These were as part of the governor's executive order. There was a stopgap measure that was working in there for a period of time, and things weren't looking good. But the bottom line was, at the end, all right, cigarette taxes were raised and smokeless tobacco was raised. We could talk about that a little bit if you want. At the end, enough money came in to prevent it from being worse. And sometimes, I don't know, if you make up a number, if you're making $100,000 a year and you thought you were going to lose your job, and they come back and say, you're going to keep your job, but you're going to make $90,000 a year, you're going to take that. So it could have been worse.
So, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
However, so yes, so everyone says, the good news, the budget crisis is over, and I say
it's not happy news, but
it's not over. And I look forward to working with Kevin. I think he agrees that we can no longer exist as a state from crisis to crisis. Right. Nobody does that in their homes, in their businesses, but we've gotten into these bad habits of swinging from tree to tree and reacting. And we have to figure out why that's happening. We can't end up in this place 2 years from now. It's so unfair to our citizens, to our businesses. I talked to my nephew the other day. He's 24. I said, "You're going to come back to Connecticut?" He laughed. He said, "Uncle John, it's funny, but it's not."
Well, of that's also bad PR.
People say it's bad PR, but every day I hear, Kevin hears from citizens that say, it's not a bad PR. Maybe a little bit of it. But the writing, the proof is in the pudding. Companies are leaving. We can't keep shrugging our shoulders. Citizens are leaving. Businesses are overburdened. We can't keep operating like this. It is so unfair.
Okay,
yesterday I met with the president of the Realtors Association, and they've now, when they're putting a house on the multiple MLS, the multiple listing service, they actually added 2 different fields on there. One, where are you moving from and where are you moving to, so they can start tracking, because they said there is an out-migration, which we know, it's already been in the papers recently, over 20,000 residents have left the state of Connecticut. So people are moving out of the state of Connecticut. So at least this will provide even a bigger demographic as to age groups, et cetera, income categories. And so people can't refute saying nobody's leaving Connecticut. The fact is they are, and why?
And there was a new census. The census and the IRS, they keep an eyeball on this. The IRS, they kind of know where you're going. Anyway, back to John's point, the two biggest groups in Connecticut, and they track this, the two biggest groups that were leaving in Connecticut were seniors over the age of 65 and younger people, which is what John was talking about. Those two groups, and it's been tracked, I don't have all the numbers off my head, but those two age coherence, basically, are the two biggest groups among the ones moving out, at least in 2015, 2016. I can't tell you a 40-year trend, but I can tell you what's happening now.
And what's shameful about that fact is that our flagship university, University of Connecticut, is ranked 18th in the country for public universities. So as soon as these kids get their degrees, boom, they're out of here. And we've got to stop this brain drain and find out what we can do as a state to make sure that Connecticut is attractive, both in the amenities it offers, the job availabilities, and the affordability.
So this might be a good time if we need to develop something new. We're going to be switching governors. There's a gubernatorial campaign beginning. Are there any candidates who are now talking about running for governor who have brilliant ideas and a way to recommend or lead the state out of this problem?
Go ahead, Chris.
Chris, you
Nice
have been.
pass. Yeah.
There's a,
I think I should probably address it because I'm the only guy who's not running for governor.
Yeah, Kevin and I both declared today.
I'm the only person not running for governor, not only on this panel, but I think in the state.
Well, I'm not running.
Anyway, the governor's race has, I don't know, potentially 20 or more people there. I moderated a debate the other night. There was 7 or 8 Republicans there, and a whole bunch couldn't make it. Even names that you would know were not there. Mayor Boughton from Danbury, Mayor Loretti from Shelton were not there. Everybody is in. Everybody seems to have their hat in the ring or partially in the ring. Luke Bronin, the mayor of Hartford, is the latest to jump in. Potentially Ned Lamont could jump in, who your viewers remember beat Lieberman in a primary and then lost to Lieberman back in 2006. So anyway, there's not really any huge front runners in the governor's race right now, and that is why so many people are jumping into it. A lot of the big names that your viewers would know have all decided not to run. Okay, Malloy's not running, Nancy Wyman, George Jepson, Kevin Lembo. A lot of these people have said, I'm not running for governor. Ted Kennedy Jr. A whole series of people have said that they're not running. So as far as who's in, like I said, conceivably 20 or more people are either exploring, they're partially in, they're partially out. Tony Boucher is exploring for a statewide office. She might go for governor, she might not. But if you're asking me, is there any one super standout who's the head of the field, who's ahead of everybody by 20 or 30 points, the answer is no.
How about Oz Griebel?
He may run too. I've been hearing Oz Griebel's going to be running for months, and he has not announced it yet.
He's a great guy. He's a solid, great thinker. Good. Used to live in Simsbury. I can speak for the Democratic side, and I know a lot of the folks who are running on the Democratic side, and some of them are friends of mine, but none of them are speaking to the long-term fixes we need to do. And again, that's with due respect. And many of them are talking about more taxes and legalizing marijuana and things like that I don't think are healthy for our state long term. So nobody on my side has jumped out that that's the one from my perspective.
Kevin?
On our side, I think folks are really staying at the 50,000 foot level. That'll
yeah.
As we get closer to the convention, which will be in May of this year, I believe, where we will choose our endorsed candidate. That's when you start to be more specific, but you're not going to get any specificity out of any of these candidates yet.
So anybody brilliant? Anybody that you've noticed, Chris, who's got brilliant
Luke
ideas,
Bronin's
new
a smart
ideas?
guy. I don't know if I'd call him brilliant. He's a smart guy. He's a Rhodes Scholar who went to Yale Law School. Most people don't do that. That puts you in the top 1% if you're a Rhodes Scholar. He's a sharp guy. Hartford has a lot of big problems. Bronin used to be the chief legal counsel to Malloy, So I'm sure his opponents will try to tie him to Malloy. Anybody who can be tied to Malloy will be tied to Malloy. Malloy has got the lowest ratings of any Democratic governor in the country, in the nation. So fair or not, I guarantee you people will try to say that person was with Malloy, even if they weren't. However, on a 30-second TV commercial, it's hard to combat that. So it's a free country. Some people will tell you there's no rules in politics. All kinds of things will be said on flyers and TV commercials, etc.
We need a governor, though, who is going to bring people together and work well with the legislature and raise the state up and really revitalize our state, not just our economy, but I think the spirit of our state. And as you say, the PR and somebody who really works well with others. I think we need somebody who's going to rise to that occasion and have some lofty goals, but get the job done, but less dissension and
Also to add in, I might want to say George Jepsen is not running for Attorney General, so you could see some people sliding off from one case to another. By that I mean there's a guy named Chris Matty, who was a federal prosecutor. He was running for governor. Now he's going to run for Attorney General. So you may see people, obviously you have to be an attorney, you may see people swinging off. Susan Beisowitz, who we have not mentioned here, people always think she may jump in. So it's still, we're sitting here, a couple of weeks before Christmas, and it's still wide open. Your viewers probably know this is very late. This is very, by historical standards, the governor's election is November of next year. We have less than a year to go. And to have this much uncertainty, by historical standards, this is very, very late. And just in our close history here, everybody kind of knew Rowland, okay, back in the Rowland days. Rowland's the candidate of the Republicans, okay, we knew that. They knew this far in advance, 18 months, 2 years before, et cetera, et cetera. Bill Curry, in his heyday, they knew he was running for the Dems, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's a conglomeration of 20 people.
But that seems to me to be a sign that that nobody who knows anything really wants to be in that job. I mean, Kevin Lembo and Nancy Wyman, who were two top Democratic people, and that for a long time everybody assumed that both of them would run, but they both seem to have decided, God, no, the problems are so great, we're not running.
Well, I think that the person that is finally voted in by the voters for that job can anticipate being a one-term governor if they want to truly fix what Connecticut needs to do to be fixed. Because there is going to be a lot of animosity and non-goodwill from, I think, the folks that are affected by what needs to happen in Connecticut. And you don't want to elect a governor that's going to continue going down the same path that we're going down. I mean, we need structural changes. We talk about that all the time in the state, and you've got to have a willing partner in the legislature and in the governorship. And I think you're going to see huge changes in the legislature as well, because there's a lot of legislative candidates that are looking at higher office as well. So those will be open seats. In the Senate, we're tied 18-18. What's going to happen? We know on the Republican side, three Senate Republicans are already looking at higher office potentially. On the Democrat side, we know at least one right now is looking at higher office. So,
and we have a couple of vacancies already in the House because Laura Hoydick
is election coming up
for Laura, and then there's another race.
Dave Barham.
So we got two, and then you got Liz Lanahan running for lieutenant governor. How does it affect that race in Cheshire? Who else in the House is running? Well, Prasad is running. Srinivasan from Glastonbury is running for governor, or at least exploratory. So there's a lot of moving parts.
And around April, we'll know people will start announcing their retirements that won't run again. I mean, this was a marathon year, as you said at the top of the show. That some people it's more than they could handle, and I think that they may say thank you. It's been a great service to be an elected official in the state, but I'm going to move on.
Because it is a part-time legislature with part-time pay.
Well, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Well, every legislator has their own personal setup. Some have their job changes. I've been there long enough to tell you of people their job changed. Suddenly they were traveling a lot more. They say I can't be a legislator anymore. That's happened in the House, in the Senate. Different things come up in life, And sometimes that's hard to predict. And a legislator will say, I just can't do it anymore based on my schedule. My other job changed, et cetera, et cetera. This happened, that happened, and I can't do it anymore.
So one of the things that, so we have a governor's race in flux. We have legislators who are leaving, who might want, this sort of everything seems to be in flux. I heard, so it's sort of hard to predict what's going to happen in the legislature this year. This show is we're simultaneously doing a review of what happened last year and sort of a preview of what's happening next year. I heard some complaints about Joe, the new Speaker of the House, Joe Arasemowicz, and that he wasn't a strong enough leader, that he made too many promises. Chris, you just interviewed him in his role as high school football coach.
Yes.
What kinds of things were you hearing about him? I don't want to put you on the spot, John.
Well, the House Democratic Caucus is quite diverse. So there are some conservatives and there are some very liberal people. And corralling them all together or getting them all to agree, 79 people, is very difficult. I don't know if anybody could do it. But generally, if you're the leader, can you be blamed for that? Yes. Is there anything that you can do to make 79 people agree, of people who are really don't agree on whether it's marijuana or whatever it is? Trying to get those people to all march in lockstep is not an easy job. So pretty much anybody who has ever been speaker, and on the federal level, John Boehner, and a lot of speakers get shoved out,
right,
because it's hard to corral. And on the federal level, you have the Freedom Caucus, et cetera, and a lot of problems with there. On the state level, it might not be quite as extreme, but on the state level, it's not an easy thing to do. And part of that is one of the reasons why we lasted until Halloween this year is because of that lack of agreement.
John, so what were Democratic caucuses like in the House?
Colorful. This year was really interesting in that it brought a lot of new personalities to the caucus. We got kind of a surge of maybe more left-leaning Democrats after the Trump election. We've got some more Bernie Sanders folks in there, and more moderates like myself. And we lost a lot of, I don't want to say older, but seasoned legislators. I was talking to you once about, Dargan's gone now, Roberta Willis, Mary Fritz, Betty Bocas. Trying to think on the other side of the aisle.
There was a huge change this year.
Yeah, so that was really different in terms of the dynamics. But Joe's a great guy. And to Chris's point, it has to be hard to herd all these different personalities and values. But I have to tell you, he or Matt never cajoled me, twisted my arm, threatened me. We had very frank, candid conversations about our differences regarding the direction of the state, especially regarding the budget and the economy. They listened, they understood. I haven't been punished or exiled to the state armory. But yeah, it's I appreciate the difficulty of any leader's job is to herd cats. But it was a really different dynamic in my third term. I don't know if you can speak to that too.
I'm sure it was
even
different.
More so for you.
Power sharing in the Senate must have been very different this year too.
And I'll speak to your original question about Joe. Being in the leadership meeting when we were developing the budget, at one point we decided that let's kick the staff out. So it was just the 8 of us in this room. We really got a chance to know each other quite well. And Joe and Matt did their best. They didn't compromise their principles, but I think they did the best that they could, given the numbers of their caucus, because the margins were so tight that they know that they couldn't bring out you don't want to bring out something that you know is going to fail. And that just doesn't happen. Mario Looney didn't learn that lesson. But you generally don't bring something out that you know is going to fail. Joe actually, in one scenario, gave up one of his things that he wanted to do in the budget because we were resistant to it and said this isn't the time for that. And this is one of his priorities that he gave up on. So he's willing to get to the end goal.
He's willing to compromise.
He's willing to compromise, and I give him credit. I mean, I think he's The only flaw that Joe had, any kids around about it, is that I can't set dates on calendars anymore, because you want to set a goal, and sometimes you have to put that deadline on there to move things along. But in the legislature, legislative time starts at 10. Well, that means 1 o'clock potentially. So we have a bad habit in the legislature of not doing things on time. So it's really difficult. And I think he's learned no more date setting because it just doesn't matter. Just like the legislative session was supposed to end June 6th, and I think we're still in special session right now. I think we still are.
We are.
I don't think we've seen a date.
We did not.
We're not done. So we're still in special session.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happened this year that's near and dear to my heart was a cut in CTN's budget, where the CTN is the state legislative network, sort of like SCTV is our local network. CTN is the network that broadcasts all the sessions and many of the committee meetings. And the budget ended up being cut and I'm not sure that legislators realized how much it was being cut by, and the management of CTN, which is a company called CPAN, said they could not do it for that, and there was a shutdown, and now it's operating on a skeleton staff without any leadership, really. Were you guys aware of the major cut, and what was your reaction to hearing about it? Kevin?
Well, I was aware because we discussed that in negotiations. I supported it. Everybody should be aware because it was in the document they all voted on, one way or the other. And, while I applaud the work that they did at CTN, it grew too fast. We were spending millions and millions and millions of dollars so the group could go out and showcase. A legislator goes out and does something in their district. Well, next thing you know, all the camera crews have to come and they're filming this just so it's PR for that one individual legislator. It got beyond just functioning of government. We said we should stick to the original focus of what CTN was for. It's for the folks that can't come up to Hartford to see what's the legislative branch is doing and the executive branch is doing. We're going to make sure that they're filming everything that happens in our hearing rooms, in our chambers, and that way people can be informed. But no more going off campus because a legislator is holding a 100th birthday party for somebody or something like that, or they're giving an award to somebody for something.
That seems very bizarre to me.
That happens.
CTN did that.
You see some of the things, and I know that's near and dear to your heart, but
it is.
We have to rank things, and we have to rank things in a matter of importance. We're talking about cuts in Medicare and folks that have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Is that a priority over a TV crew going out? And why don't we start thinking out of the box about having some of our technical schools coming in and having interns learn how to staff some of these equipment.
They actually have an internship program where people come in.
So, but that's organized by that one private company. So there's things that we can do at our colleges that maybe they can come in.
We didn't.
I know, Dominique, but your argument, because you were an employee there,
I was,
and it's hard to say they shouldn't see a reduction in their budget. But the reality is it needs to be.
I agree with you that. After I left, that CTN and CPAN tried to expand too fast. But I totally disagree with you on covering individual legislators. There was nothing that was ever covered that was just for an individual legislator.
I'll go back and I'll send you a clip.
Okay.
Because you're wrong there.
All right. Well, I mean, I have not been there for 3 years. I retired from there as the program manager 3 years ago. I like to think that if I was there, that these things might not have happened. But I have no idea.
But you're still the voice of CTN. Did you know that?
My voice still, on one or two things, my voice
royalties.
is... No, I have never gotten one tiny
it's
thing.
It's great to hear your voice on CTN.
Chris, what was your
CTN is used by a lot of people as reporters. I can tell you, we can keep an eyeball on a couple of things simultaneously. I do know that in the past they really had some very ambitious expansion plans that did not happen. And as far as the money goes, in the Capitol, as you know, and in the LOB, all of the cameras are kind of fixed and set up, and they're ready to go, and it doesn't seemingly cost a lot of money. But if you want to go down to New London and film Governor Malloy at a press conference live in New London, that can be expensive. So maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but in other words, if you're looking for money, the more you go out, the more live shots you do, the more people you need, the more equipment you need. So things can get very expensive. You could cover everything under the sun, and
so the expansion of
go.
CTN was a proposal to put cameras in every room so that every single hearing could be covered. It had nothing to do with covering live events out in the field.
Yes, but they have done that.
They have done it because they'll
go under the viaduct in Hartford and literally cover that live.
That's because they have a new piece of equipment that's called
that allows them to do that.
That allows them to do that.
Right.
Yes.
No, I'm just saying these things cost money. That's all.
Yeah, but that cuts the time, the editing time, and that wasn't an expense. It just saves time when you come in from editing it in a booth and taking people's time. It's done live and goes faster.
You're making a justification on what he's saying and what I'm saying,
right?
And that's not fair.
Right. No, you're right. I should actually shut up because I have very strong feelings about this.
It is a great resource.
No, I mean, you can.
It is a tremendous resource, and it's really important for the
SCTV.
people,
Yeah.
for the people of the state of Connecticut. And it's given the cutbacks in the in capital reporting and the few number of people that exist now in that press room on the 4th floor in the Capitol. You depend on CTN's coverage.
Why doesn't a private company, Hearts newspaper, whoever, fund those positions so they can be covered? Why does it go back to the taxpayers? You want the taxpayers to fund so the private businesses
the taxpayers
can benefit
don't
by not having to do the work.
The taxpayers don't pay for it. The cable
through ratepayers. So it's the same. Ratepayers are taxpayers.
Right. Well,
I'm just saying that in America, maybe it makes sense. In America, you could have something phenomenal. You could have CTN in every town covering the Avon Town Council or something. But it's a question of how many people would watch it. But anyway, it's a problem of money. It's a problem of how much you can do. The staff is fantastic. If you give them enough money, they can do all sorts of things. And it's a bad money time, and that's why we're talking about this now. I enjoy watching things on CTN. So, and I was there long enough when CTN was not there.
I know.
And I was there in the infancy of CTN when you would see things on your computer, and it was very herky-jerky because the technology wasn't there. Now you turn on your computer, you might as well be a television set. But I was there in the days, and it's not that long ago, when CTN was just starting, and you could barely hear the person on the floor of the house, and you really couldn't see them because it was so fuzzy and the technology wasn't good enough. So CTN has come a long, long, long way. As far as where the future goes, I don't really know. And that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Right.
I don't know what the future is. I don't know how much money they're going to get. And it's a big issue. I'm not saying it's as big as, whether we alter the state income tax or not, but it's an important issue.
Right. And it's my feeling, you talked about how many people watch. I don't think a lot of people actually watch government television, except for reporters and other legislators who can follow things that are going on without being there themselves. But I think it's important that it be on the record, and given the cutbacks in reporters, that stuff is there, it's available for viewing, and people can go back and view it, so things don't happen in the secret and the dark of night.
I think a lot of people actually do watch it, because some people say to me, I saw you on TV last night, and I knew it had to be CTN. I said, what was I talking about? I give them a little quiz. And they're able to actually tell me. So I'm like, wow, people are actually watching
It's
CTN.
like people watching SCTV, which is another great provider of government.
All right, so we just have a few minutes left, and because we had so much time, I always like to give people a chance to get to know you. A lot of people don't pay that close attention to their lawmakers and what they do, and a little bit of a profile of you. Kevin, tell me a little bit about your background, because not everybody knows what your background was, what you did for a living, what you do for a living now, aside from the legislature.
Sure. Very quickly, grew up as a young lad in Granby. Moved to Canton. I was a police officer in Canton for 23 years, so total combined in law enforcement for 28 years. I left employment there in 2012, and we didn't have health care for our retirees, so I was kind of young still, a lot of time left to me, so I went and got a job for Eversource. I work in their Community Relations Economic Development Agency now. I also own a restaurant in the Collinsville section of Canton, Wilson's Pub.
Oh,
so my wife.
Selfless promotion. You know,
Hey, why not?
I gotta come check it out.
We want to boost the.
I got the
ratings.
ratings. I gotta come.
CTV, right?
Yeah.
But so run a restaurant. I am a state senator. I'm a senator now. I'm in my 5th term, 10 years. I served in the House of Representatives for 3 terms, 6 years before that. And, I am honored every day I'm up in Hartford because, number one, for the people sending me up there, but I learn something new every day, and I'm all about education. I get into discussions on topics I would normally never have been involved in, but this really is an eye-opener. And I think the best part of the job I like is to be able to solve folks' problems.
John?
Well, it's an honor and privilege to serve in the legislature and work with Kevin and Chris. Great, and thank you for having us on the show. I was born and raised, I'm a townie in Simsbury, born in Terriffill, from a family of 7. My mom thought I was really an odd child because I wasn't watching Sesame Street, but I was watching Watergate hearings and Vietnam War coverage, so they knew that something was wrong with this child. But anyway, my dad was a town doctor here for 40 years. And was always interested in politics and government, was on the Aging and Disability Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, was on the Board of Selectmen for 9 years, 5 years as Deputy First Selectman, and was elected to my first term in 2012, so this is my 3rd term, after Linda Schofield retired. And as Kevin said, it's just a fascinating job. You learn something new every day, working with people, working with the great people of our districts, solving problems for them. Yep. And every day, I mean, any given day, you're dealing with autism, budgetary issues, employment issues. It's just a great experience. Professionally, I've been in the nonprofit field, marketing and fundraising, and my other job, most of us have other jobs, I work for the Brain Injury Alliance of Connecticut, and I do their marketing and fundraising. So,
Chris, quickly, I have...
Well, I'm really a New Yorker. I've been in Simsbury for 25 years, but I was born and raised and grew up in New York. I had a lot of fun in New York. I was born in Flushing, Queens, near Shea Stadium, back in the day. Grew up on Long Island. Went to college in the Bronx and then in Manhattan at Columbia. And but I've been living in Simsbury for about 25 years, and it's a phenomenal place. I never saw any bears when I was in New York, and I didn't really see, I didn't see the deer and the wild turkeys that I see now. So it's a lot of fun being here. I'm still getting used to it, and I've only been here 25 years, so it's not very long.
But you have great representation in the
I got
great senator and a rep.
I know my local officials. I know them all, and here we are, And I watch CTN on top of that.
And SCTV.
And SCTV. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for having us.
It's been fun. It's been, and I apologize for getting a little emotionally involved myself.
Not at all.
So our time is up. Thanks to everyone here at SCTV for getting the show on the air. Special thanks to our volunteer director, Joe Galliette, and our cameraman, Joe Giorgenti, and Bob Oyesicek. I hope I got that right. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any portion of this show, you can find it on our website at simsburytv.org. And just a reminder, SCTV is now available on more channels on Xfinity. The public channel is on channel 5, and it's also on channel 1084. It's on 96, and it's also available on 1090 now. And channel 95 can also be seen on 1070. And we're still available on Frontier channel 99. So this has been a great show. I'm Dominique Avery. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time for the Talk of Simsbury.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.